Hello and welcome. I'm Shannon Piper. I'm with the marketing team here at Lexipol, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to our event today. I also want to start out today just by commending all of you who are here today, who registered for this event and are joining us. This is not an easy topic, and we're not going to be looking at some exciting fire videos or funny photos. We're going to be having an honest discussion. It's probably going to make all of us uncomfortable at one point or another, and that's okay. That's sort of the intent of the event, and yet I know that's difficult to try to find the time to do that and to kind of push yourself to do that, so thank you. Many of you also submitted questions when you registered for this event, and that's great because that's really what's driving our curriculum today. We did not prepare other remarks. Everything you're going to hear today is driven by questions that were submitted by you or your fellow registrants. And those questions were excellent. I really have to say, very intriguing, all different perspectives, some overlap, but a lot of great questions. So we won't get to all of them by any means, but we did our best to try to pick representative questions and really cover as many topics as we can. And we'll, of course, be inviting you to submit additional questions throughout the presentation. You can do that in the webinar console. Can't promise that we're going to get to everything or any of them, but I definitely, if we have time, we'll get to a few of them. And if we don't, I'll pass them along to our presenters as well. I also want to just mention, because there were some questions along these lines, is that, we're not here to talk about racism. We're really here to talk more about inequity, and within the fire service. And the two are slightly different, or maybe more than slightly different. And I think what's important is that we're focused today on the inequities that you see in society are reflected in the fire service because the fire service is a social institution. So what we're here to do today is to kind of ask, what can we all do about it as individuals and as leaders? Is there anything, what's within our realm to kind of take a stab at making things a little bit better and addressing some of those long-standing inequities that don't necessarily have to do with personal behaviors. A couple of notes that I just want to go over until we jump into all of that. We are recording our session today. We'll send you a link by the end of the day with a link to that recording. We'll send you an email with a link to that recording. We're also going to be providing certificates of attendance. You will receive that in a separate email. And then although we don't have a PowerPoint presentation prepared for you today because we really wanted to focus on the presenters and their comments, we do have some great handouts for you. Those are going to be located on the same page that the recording is located on. But if you're really itching to get your hands on something right away, look in your webinar console, either in the chat field or the attendees field. It depends on how you're joining. There may be a handouts button. You're looking for handouts. We have 3 of them that are preloaded in the console. One of them is a compilation of strategies from our presenters that they gave us for this webinar, things that they've used in their presentation, in their departments that's really helped them. And then the other 2 are documents provided very generously from Chief Harold Scoggins of the Seattle Fire Department, a comprehensive white paper on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as a toolkit. And while those materials are specific to King County, Washington, I've looked through them. There's lots of information there. There's a lot that we can all take away from those. So be sure to check out all those materials as well. And finally, just our usual disclaimer. Don't think it really applies here today, but we are not presenting any sort of legal advice today. So it's really an educational presentation. All right, now I want to introduce our great panel. Moderating today's discussion is Deputy Chief Billy Goldfeder with the Loveland Sims Fire Department in Ohio. Chief Goldfeder is a consultant for Lexipol, and he also serves on the editorial advisory board of FireRescue1.com, which is Lexipol's industry news site. He's a board member for the September 11th Families Foundation, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and the International Association of Fire Chiefs, among many other things. I'm keeping all of these introductions short today. There's lots I could say about our presenters. Chief Reginald Freeman is the fire chief and the emergency management director for Hartford, Connecticut, and he previously served as the international fire chief for the Lockheed Martin, as well as a civilian fire chief in Iraq for the Department of Defense. He is an adjunct professor in both undergraduate and graduate fire science studies, as well as public administration, and he serves on the NFPA board. Chief John Butler is the fire chief with Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department in Virginia, and he formerly served in Howard County, Maryland. He was actually the first chief there to serve in all ranks as he moved up through the department. Chief Butler is an executive fire officer, and he holds certificates from Johns Hopkins Public Safety Leadership Program, John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, and the IAFC Fire Service Executive Development Institute. And finally, I mentioned Chief Scoggins earlier with the Seattle Fire Department. He's been fire chief there since 2015, and he served also as a firefighter in the U.S. Air Force. And then spent a large part of his career with the Glendale Fire Department in California, where he started as a firefighter and rose throughout all of the ranks and eventually was named fire chief. So thank you to our panel for being here today. Welcome, and I will start by turning it over to Chief Goldfeder.
Hey, thanks, Shannon, and thanks for everybody for joining us today. You know, Shannon made a great comment about the societal issue of what we're going to talk about today. So why on earth would we think that we can come up with some solutions, ideas, if society can't figure some of this stuff out? If it is a problem, and that's what we're going to touch on today, because some of us some of you joining us today may not see the problem, may not understand the problem. And that's the goal that we're trying to get to today, is talk about that. So why do we think we can solve it at the firehouse level if society can't solve it? Because we're good at solving problems. We generally, genetically, are made up as people who actually care. We are excellent problem solvers. Sometimes we want to solve them so quickly. Ask your spouses about that, or your partners. They'll tell you, oh, you always want to solve a problem so fast. Well, this problem isn't going to be solved so fast. But what's good about it is you can solve it in what I refer to as your little world of the firehouse. You can do certain things within your firehouse, your shift, your crew. And if you're a volunteer department, and we got some email on that as well. The issue in relations to volunteer fire departments really are the same we're going to talk about today, except for one part. If you're a volunteer fire department, you have to genuinely decide if you truly are welcoming people into your organization. If you're genuinely and truly welcoming people from the community, then you're on the right path and you're on your way. But if you are simply providing lip service, your trucks still have difficulty getting out, your response is terrible, your turnout, your members are not engaged, then until you truly look at that organization and open your doors and say, hey, you know what, we want to keep up. Remember, we were founded to serve the community in a volunteer department. Well, what's that community look like today? And are we welcoming those individuals into the organization? And as I said those words, I really didn't see a whole lot of difference in between a career fire department and a volunteer department as far as opening those doors up. So the other issue is that I was very anxious to be involved in this panel today because I want to learn as well. I consider myself pretty open-minded and pretty progressive, but I scratch my head sometimes too and try to understand, when people are angry and upset, do we really have to reverse things, change things around? Why does it have to impact me? Are all these discussions that people have? So I think these chiefs, who are also good friends of mine, are going to help us bridge that gap and get a better understanding of, in some respects, how challenging this is, and on the other side, how really easy it is. Again, if we truly want to move our organizations ahead. So let's start off with our questions. And we've broken these down in a couple of areas. We're going to start off with the basics. And the first question is, I understand there are racial inequities in our society. But why is this a fire service problem? Why should I care about it? Let's start with Harold.
Sure. First of all, Chiefs, it's my honor to be here with all of you today. And thank you to Lexipol for hosting this honest conversation. It's very important that we have it. And to start to get into the question, why should I be concerned? Why should my organization be concerned? Well, our organizations are a snapshot of society. We're a snapshot of our communities. So we would be a bit naive if we didn't think these conversations are taking place inside of our organizations right now. So trying to understand and create awareness to the different challenges that people face through inequities is really critical for our organization success on how we grow, how we learn, how we bring people in who don't look like us and who don't think like us. So unless we're paying attention to it, it may not be a problem to us. But sometimes when we start to pay attention to things, we start to recognize, wow, I didn't really see it that way. So as chiefs, as leaders, this should be something that we're paying attention to.
You know, and I'm going to go to our other panelists in a minute, but in relation to this, and again, the question is about the racial inequalities in society, but what does this impact the fire service? You know, we assume the community only cares that we show up and fight the fire. Where's that true? I don't know, right? We hear that a lot. What about issues against firefighters? What about violence in the firehouses? What about us being lumped in with law enforcement? I mean, we all see what the cops are going through now, but why does that have to impact us? And what's the value for the individual, the firefighter? What's the value for the department, the community, when we consider that maybe we need to address the issues of racial inequalities? John?
I'm sorry, you said John?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah.
I'm
Well,
sorry. Wait a minute. Chief Butler, I want to make sure you're in a comfort zone.
It was a little garbled. I didn't pick it up. It's
okay.
Garbled right there. Well, John is perfectly fine. This is the kind of conversation we want to have, unscripted, unplugged, and to some extent informal, but yet informational. There's a number of things I want to say, and a couple of them is, it's not so bad being grouped with other public safety like law enforcement when we're all treating the community, the right way. We don't have to be law enforcement to have some issues with how we're engaging with the community. We all have jurisdictions where we have multi-million-dollar homes, and then a few miles down the road, we have, socioeconomic depressed communities. And our responders are human in the sense that we reflect the communities we're in. If we're treating our community one way versus the other, it carries over. It carries over, and we could be seen as not, advocates for the underprivileged at times. So inequities, if we're treating the community inequitably, it carries over in the firehouse at times. The other thing is our departments, like Chief Scoggins said, it's a reflection of the community. In most jurisdictions that I'm aware of, for example, if you're working in Washington, D.C. fire, you're not all from Washington, D.C. These workforces are regional, sometimes 2, 3, 4 states, multiple little thumbnails of communities working in metropolitan areas. So it is a melting pot. That's where a lot of opinions and perspectives on politics, on race relations, they're ending up at the kitchen table. And like I said, it's not all, we all grew up in the zip code or in this city with fire and rescue jobs. So, highly sought after. There are people, like we all know, coming over 2 or 3 states to get employed. And sometimes different opinions and ideas all kind of collide all at once.
So in that respect, John, so that's a good thing, or does that have a negative impact when people who are serving a community are not necessarily from that community?
Well, this is the United States of America, where it is the largest melting pot ever. So I will always submit, and I will always start with saying it's a great thing. It's a diversity of thought. It's how we learn about each other. It's how we learn different cultures and food and music and ways of life. It is always supposed to be on the high and to the right. In recent years, we've become so divisive sometimes that the differences kind of stick out in a negative way, and that's the challenge in the community, on the roads, on road rage, and you name it, in the workplace, everywhere. So in that, and I'm going to go to you in a second, Reggie. So in that respect, then, when we do have that diversity of anyone being applied to our organization,
that's a good thing. It's just a matter of also making sure that people in the community who may be interested in working here have that opportunity as well.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, Harold, go ahead. You've got something.
Sure. Hey, Billy, just to weigh in on one of the things that you mentioned, oftentimes we as firefighters, we think because we're there to deliver EMS and fire and rescue services that that's all the community wants. That's a bit short-sighted on our behalf. We should really be trying to understand our communities, the cultures, values, norms, so we can truly serve them well. And if we're only stuck in that mindset, hey, we're only here for fire and EMS and rescue services and not really worried about any of those other things, that's going to compromise the service that we provide at some point. It may not on that call, but it may on how you're viewed as a professional fire service organization.
And the community's paying attention. They're not just calling for fire and EMS. They see us. They want to see themselves in us, and vice versa. So.
And Billy, just to piggyback a little bit on your original question, the racial inequities in our society, and why is this a fire service issue? Why should we care about it? And then your question about, we assume community cares only that someone shows up when they're called, but is that true? The answer to that question is no. And it goes back to the role that the fire service played in treating persons of color disparagingly. And I go back to the civil rights era in Birmingham, Alabama, where even to this day, you can find vivid pictures and video of firefighters hitting innocent men, women, and children with straight streams. And I've even had an elder in my family that was highly upset. I'm from Louisiana, the great state of Louisiana. Let me preface it that way first. I had an elder in my family who was upset that I decided to become a firefighter. And she asked me one simple question: do you not know what firefighters have done to us? And that's a reality that is prevalent in a lot of people's lives that we don't tend to think about, because we just enjoy the luxuries and the privilege of being a member of the most honorable profession on this earth. However, we're not so innocent in our past indiscretions. And so where there is challenges in our society, a lot of times there's correlation in local governments. The fire service is the least diverse, or one of the two least diverse publicly funded professions. I mean, think about that for a second. In the top two least diverse publicly funded professions, that's an issue. That's an issue.
And an issue because what I'm sensing in this discussion is it's about using the term that the late Chief Bruno did, customer service, and it's more than just. I mean, we go to a restaurant, we want a hamburger, and the hamburger is important, but also how we're treated, the respect shown by the waitress, the waiter, the cooks, the people. We want that whole feeling. Is that kind of what you're talking about? It's got to be more than just the water on the fire and just more than CPR on grandma.
Without a doubt.
Okay. All right. Let's move on.
There has to be that connection. There has to be, that, and it doesn't matter what color your skin is or what your heritage is, but people just want to feel valued, and they know if you're being real or not. And so a lot of times, unfortunately, people tend to lean more towards someone who may look like them, or share the same heritage, or share the same background. Doesn't necessarily have to be the case in all instances, but typically people feel more comfortable with someone who is not of just like mind, but could relate to them on a personal level.
Okay, yeah, it really it kind of makes a lot of sense when you think about it. But people would also think, so is it my responsibility to pay for the inequities of the past? And my response in answering my own question is, well, yeah, it sort of is. I mean, if we're going to put that gear on and it's about the trust in the community, then we do have to look at what's happened in the past. If your grandma or your family or something, when you tell me the story about your grandma, that's really sticking in my head. when I hear, and Harold, you're from California. Many years ago, I read a story about a fire in a home of a Vietnamese family. And I guess traditionally the Vietnamese cook right in their home with fire and almost like a pit. And what shocked me was the firefighters not only put the fire out, but then they cited the family for cooking in their home in the manner they were doing. And then when they took turn to learn and they opened up the doors in the entire complex, everybody was doing that. So it's a matter of understanding that culture, your community, the people you serve. And I'm not saying we should encourage barbecuing in the residence, but I think it's beyond that. It's about understanding the people we're serving. And that's not only by getting out in the community, but also welcoming those people in, whether it be just for the visit or come work for us. That's kind of what you're talking about. Anybody, am I on target there?
Hey, Billy, just to touch on one of the points you made, is it your responsibility to pay for the inequities of the past? It's all of our responsibilities to prevent those inequities from happening in the future. And we do that by learning from the past. So we have to be open to examine our systems, our processes, our procedures, our practices in all of our organizations to prevent those inequities from happening in the future. We all own that. Doesn't matter what color you are. Every leader in the fire service owns that. And if they don't, they should. That's really important.
In relation to that, this is the old song about walk a mile in my shoes. Somebody may be joining us today and looking at the panel and seeing 3 black chiefs and a white chief. Well, the reason we invited 3 black chiefs is because I couldn't possibly describe their experiences because I've not experienced that. Okay, I can't teach you about high-rise firefighting if I don't have the background and experience in high-rise firefighting. That's why we have 3 black chiefs with us today, because not only, and you heard this loud and clear, these were not chiefs appointed from City Hall. These are chiefs who've climbed the ladder and worked their way up. They've done every job we're doing. The difference is that they've had some experiences that some of us may not have, and we're trying to share those experiences today through their wisdom as veteran firefighters. All right, so let's go to a subject that we're all familiar with. So how did the events triggered by the murder of George Floyd impact the conversations around racial justice, racial equity or inequity in fire departments? Let's start with Reggie on that one.
That's a great question, Billy. And I know for me, along with many other people, not just George Floyd, but other instances of African Americans, unarmed African Americans being murdered by law enforcement. It's very personal. It's very personal from my perspective of someone being on the receiving end of racism. Someone as a teenager, I recall distinctly having to put both hands out of the window anytime a police officer approached my vehicle, so they could see my hands and I wouldn't have the chance of getting shot unnecessarily as a young Black man driving around Mississippi, where my father retired from the Air Force after 20 years in Biloxi. So I recall kneeling with our police chief here in Hartford, and I was not invited to a lot of these events to where our police chief and police department went with our community organizers, but I thought it was important for me to be there as an African American and someone in uniform, because going back to our first question, some people don't see a difference between firefighters and police officers as uniformed sworn members of society. So I wanted to send a clear message that I hear the community, I grieve with the community, I'm in pain along with the community, and the Hartford Fire Department cares about what happens and how it happens. And so to have the fire chief there present, I thought was important. And I've got my knees skint up a few times going to a few of those events, but it was worth every moment. So internally within the fire department, I found it prudent to send a communication out to the organization, to talk about this specific topic and the importance of us remembering beyond any and everything else, we are brothers and sisters. Our organizational statements remain intact. Our organizational statements remain our focus as priorities, which is our mission, our vision, and our values as a department. And we should have healthy dialogue about what's going on around us. Because again, there are people hurting from those events, those tragic events. And at the time, that was including myself. It was a very personal moment for me, especially having a loved one that was killed by a police officer, and my loved one was unarmed. So it just took me back to that place.
And as a chief, you really, what you did, you showed some leadership there in provoking the discussion, forcing the conversation. You made a statement. You got it out there. Did you get any negative feedback on you embracing the issue as opposed to just staying in your office and not talking about it?
No, did not get any pushback or any negative comments that got back to me anyway. I think it was welcomed. There were members who wanted more as far as the department taking a specific position. Of course, as a publicly funded organization, and me and my sworn duties as a fire chief, I personally, as a fire chief, I'm apolitical. So we did certain things and we did not do other things because we serve the entire community without prejudice, and we have sworn duties that we have to uphold. So no negativity in regards to the communication. I think and for us, we're fortunate enough to be a very diverse department. 67% of our department is Black and Latino. Out of 357 members. Our city is 85% Black and Latino. So we had some very healthy dialogue, very healthy discussion. But where there is advancement for some, others see that as a loss. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. And we have to be cognizant of all of our brothers and sisters. We have to pay attention to all of our brothers and sisters. And that's critically important.
I think that's an excellent point for those people who are not for the white audience, including myself, is to understand this is not or should not be about taking one group and going in a direction. This should be about taking the entire group as a whole going in that direction, but including everyone and not excluding anybody. Is that a fair paraphrase of what you said?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Everyone
John?
matters. Everyone is important. We have to have open and honest dialogue. And, sometimes that means that certain things may be said that you may not like or you may not agree with, but we can disagree without being disagreeable.
Well, and we're so quick to, jump in a building or jump in a car and take those risks. But it seems due to a number of things that direct, honest communication has become very challenging for society. And I don't care what you look like. It's easier to send a text. It's easier to post on Facebook than to have a conversation. The issue is we have company officers and chief officers that are expected to have those conversations. We've talked before, we're renting your behavior for that period of time. You made a comment, we do things without prejudice. When you accept a position in the fire department, you have to behave a certain way. You've got to figure out when you promote up whether you can do that or not. That's kind of a big deal. We are paying people for a behavior, volunteer or not. John?
George Floyd's murder wasn't, it was a black man's murder, but it was a murder, an American. It was an American, and it mortified a lot of people, our country. Any human with a halfway decent dignity saw that as a tragedy. And what I wanted to ensure was I was hoping not to be another talking head where many people were saying the obvious, that this is horrible, it's bad, it's horrible. There were a lot of messages coming from a lot of leaders and people of influence. What I wanted to try, and I emphasize the word try to do, is in my spheres of influence around the country and in the region, is encourage the dialogue. I didn't want to write about it. I wanted us to be about it. and let's talk. And it kind of stumped me for a little bit that I kept espousing that we should be speaking about this, talking about it, get around the table, talk about these race relations and social injustices. And I couldn't see the conversation projecting, high to the right. It was still very sticky to have these conversations. And that's where the United States of America is right now, in most environments. I think we have a lot of work to do to have those courageous conversations. It's easier for me to sit in front of my keyboard and blast a global email to the organization and say, "Oh, this is horrible. We are great, and we should do better." The tough work is, like I said, talking about it. And by virtue of, I didn't come with a manual. I don't know how to do it either. It's work. We're all going to have to put the work in. How to strike up unhealthy social injustice, bias conversations. How do I walk in your shoes? I think somebody said it on the webinar here. Let me see the world through your lenses. And have a safe environment. Safe environment is sometimes a missing link to having these courageous conversations. We still have a whole lot of work to do to establish safe environments to speak about things that are uncomfortable. It took me a while to learn that, and a few friends of mine were saying, most organizations tell you to leave your politics, your religion at home. Leave your politics and religion, and that's generally how we came up in the fire service. So in 2020 and 2021, to flip that script to say, okay, well, leave your politics at home, whatever that means. But let's, or your religion. But let's talk about race relations. It's still not a very healthy place. It still has a negative connotation that I'm going to say something intentionally or unintentionally that's going to get me in trouble. So we have a lot of work, and I don't have the secret sauce yet, the solution. I don't think many people do, but we just got to keep working on it. Leave it better than we met it.
The ability to carry that conversation on, the ability to have any conversation in an area of comfort is a challenge. But I think once we give it a shot, and you made a great point. These days, because I don't want to get in trouble for it, I'm just not going to bring it up. And we'll talk more about that later, I think. Harold, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a couple of comments on the murder of George Floyd. That impact was real on me as a Black man. It was very real. It was up front. It was in your face. It was an event that, required me to have conversations with my wife and with my kids and my family. Very real. But here in the Seattle Fire Department, 2020 was a very difficult year, and many of you saw some of the things that played out nationally. And as proud as I am of the organization, we had a really, really tough year. But one of the things I'll talk on that rose out of George Floyd was how proud I am of our firefighters. One of the things that one of our firefighters did, Mike Washington, is he called me up after those events and he said, "Hey, we got to do something. We got to have a conversation." And he inspired an honest conversation on Friday nights when we can all be doing something different. We invited people in on their off-duty time, and we had 4 of these honest conversations, and no agenda, no plan. Anyone can speak from their heart. But I think it led to understanding and learning. We have to do more of this. One of the things that I try to do in my personal life is, I try to walk in humility, because when I do that, it opens up my heart and it opens up my mind to seeing things just a little bit differently, especially when there's disagreement. And that's one of the things that I think is lacking from time to time, is being that humble servant. And when we transition out of that mindset, the barriers and roadblocks to go up and the learning stops. So that's very important for us as leaders.
Good discussion. So I'm a line firefighter on an engine company in an 8-station fire department. And this perfectly ties in. Realistically, what can I do about the issues of racial inequity in the fire service? Where do I start? What's one step I can take as an individual? And when I got this question, I asked myself, did this come from a white firefighter or a non-white firefighter? And then I further asked, does it really matter? So let's go back to you, Harold, and let's talk about that. The line firefighter, where do I start? And you mentioned Mike Washington and his idea of just getting people around for the conversation. Can you see that happening at a company officer level as well, just amongst the crew?
I can see it happen, but I hope it happens. We all can have an impact. If we're a person that thinks that we can't have a conversation because we don't know enough or we haven't lived the experience, that's the place to start. Start looking to who's around you and engage in some very respectful, honest conversations. And if you're not a person of color, it may require a little more listening. But there's so many tools out there to provide an understanding of the challenges that people would face. There's no excuse for not learning. So we can all do something. If I was a line firefighter and this question was swirling around in my mind, I would start the learning process. I would start to educate myself. I would start to speak to people in the organization. I would start to go learn the community, learn their lived experiences as much as you can, because that's going to pull the blinders back a little bit and help you see things a little bit differently, which leads into empathy a bit.
So John and Reggie, I'm going to twist this just a little bit. I'm just going to add a little bit more onto that because it's really falling right into my next question. So how do you start the conversation on race relations and race in the firehouse without having become a heated debate or a controversial situation? How do we make that step? How do we explain and understand, rather, the difference in equity and equality, that sort of thing? So let's bring this to the firehouse level. What are your thoughts, John?
It goes back to some basic ingredients to have any kind of healthy engagement. It's almost a social contract that we're going to start at the ground floor of respect and shared human dignity. And Harold used a very important word, and that's listening. And listen, if one of us at this kitchen table feel harmed, discriminated against, treated like crap, whatever the words are, then it should matter to all of us. Okay, it should matter to all of us. Someone's speaking and others are listening and learning, asking questions. I don't have to know your struggles to empathize with you, but it's really important for me to listen, to hear that every conversation at the proverbial kitchen table shouldn't be or doesn't have to be a debate, or it's not, left versus right, blue versus red. It's human to human. And one of us on this team isn't in a good place. And therefore it's the rest of us responsibility to hold hands, if you will, and help each other get through some of the pain, be it social, economic, professional, familial, or first and second family. If we're hurting, we're hurting.
It really helps us rethink and think about what I consider an abused term in the firehouse, and that's brotherhood and sisterhood. It's easy to put on it's easy to put on a T-shirt and high five after we put somebody's bedroom out, but the true definition goes much deeper than that. Reggie, some thoughts?
Billy, for me, it's it sounds simple, but we struggle. We struggle, right? We struggle with executing the obvious that's right in front of us. And for me, sincerity, humility is the foundation of any healthy relationship. I found, in my 20-year career that you're not going to have any more of an honest discussion with someone than you're going to have in the day room or in the kitchen at the firehouse. But for some reason, we tend to get away from dignity and respect. We tend to get away from putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. We tend to get away from viewing things from their lens instead of our own. Whether it be a person of color, whether it be a member of the LGBTQ plus community, whether it be someone who practices a different religion than you, or whether it be a female firefighter. I can't tell you how many times, and this happened to me just 2 months ago doing a station visit as I'm talking to the crew about a renovation coming up at this house, and an officer in front of this 2-company house asked the question, well, Chief, why do we have to have so many lockers in the female locker room? Why does the female locker room have to be so large? Why do they need their own bathroom? And my response was, Lou, do you not want there to be adequate space for your sisters in the firehouse? I said, think about it for a second, Lou. And he starts laughing, because that's what we tend to do in the fire service, right? We shield and we protect through humor. And so it was an honest question, but thinking about the equity for his sisters was not at the front of his mind when he asked me that question. It was by the time the conversation was finished, but that wasn't his initial thought. So we have to be humble enough and sincere enough in our deliveries to have uncomfortable conversations. And if someone doesn't quite get it right, we can't just simply decapitate them. We have to stop that practice. We have to try to encourage personal growth. We have to try to encourage general thought. We have to try to encourage someone to think about things differently from what they originally had been, from the start of the conversation. And that is from a race perspective, that is from a socioeconomic perspective, that is from a gender perspective. Humility and sincerity in conversation goes a very long way.
And the listening. I mean,
absolutely.
Big deal there, John. You covered that well, that just shut up and listen for a minute, and we're all experts in whatever the subject is we're talking about, but not in this. I'm going to move on to another question that was sent in. During a recent radio interview, a professor pointed out that a lot of resources are invested in diversity initiatives that attempt to increase racial diversity among a certain group of workers or students or residents, etc. However, diversification alone does not necessarily address the target institution's structural problems. The systems, the processes, the policies, the culture that perpetuates inequality, or inequity, I apologize. What are some of the structural issues, meaning problems, policies, that potentially need to be addressed in the fire service? And we need to focus this in the firehouse and department level. I'm not worried about the national issues. I'm worried about, for our audience, how this person can address or understand the structural issues, the problems, policies, et cetera, that potentially need to be addressed in the fire service at the department level, even at the firehouse. Harold?
Sure. That's a really big question. And I'll talk about one of the things that we do here in the Seattle Fire Department. I'm proud to work with our Racial and Social Justice Change team. That's a group of individuals who absolutely care about equity in the Seattle Fire Department. So what do? They look at our systems, our processes, our policies, our procedures, and they'll bring those things forward directly to me as the fire chief. And me as the chief, these aren't always easy conversations. Matter of fact, most of the time, they're difficult conversations. But if we're truly concerned about equity, we have to assemble a team like this to look at our practices and our organization, because here's how the outcome impacts the future. If you don't have a system, that's an equitable system of selecting people to different committees or projects or programs, and people are just selected because of who they know, well, the dominoes and the downstream effect is very real. So when that person who's selected because of who they know goes to promote, well, they have something to talk about because they've been a part of this committee, project, or program. The people who are left on the margins, who are excluded, they don't have the same conversation to have because they haven't been included. Not saying that they're a bad person, they wouldn't work just as hard, but they were kept on the margins. Well, when the promotion happens, who are you looking for? You're looking for people who are doing things, who are accomplishing things. The people who are being selected in an inequitable process are getting a bit of an unfair advantage. So we should have a system to look at all of our practices, policies and our procedures to make us a better organization. That's important for our organization and how we grow and how we treat people.
And and I think, Reggie, we'll get to you in a minute, because I know you did some things in Hartford to try and bridge some of those inequities. But I think when I look and I see, well, it looks pretty equitable to me, that's because I'm looking at it through my eyes. And again, the shoes, I haven't walked it, I haven't felt it, etc. And that's when we sometimes, again, this ties up to what John said, just shut up and listen. Take a moment to understand, to maybe better understand. This is not about taking anything away from anybody. This is about giving people the same opportunity. We're not taking anything away to do that. So, John, we'll go to you, but Reggie, I know you mentioned that you did some things in Hartford that helped bridge that a little bit. I'd like you to share that as well. But John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to keep it close to the fire station, as you said, to the table. It's really a challenge to follow Reggie and Harold, because they hit all the marks, and kind of sound like repeating some of the things, which is not a bad thing, echoing some of those same thoughts. But keeping it close to the grassroots level, our core values in most firehouses is something that's on a wall, on a frame, on a poster, and the like. But true leadership is to walk those core values every day in everything we do, and how we treat our equipment and our bodies and each other, and how we eat and how we work out. All of those things we have on bullet points on that wall poster is important to do what we say and not just what we post on walls. Some more granular steps is our policies. There should be a focus. I'm fortunate enough to have a policies manager, and with that, she's fortunate enough to be able to recruit a user group, the end user of these policies. So, you start looking at some of the structural inefficiencies or inequities. Usually they're 1980s, 1970s, 1990s policies that it's in the book, is not being lived. And someone having the ability to spend some time and collaboratively look at each policy through the equity lens. I'm not asking the equity council or the user group to write a pumps manual. It's not about the technical work, but is it fair and equal? And speaking of pumps and so on, I'll touch on promotions and then I'll shut up. It's amazing. You start looking at promotional processes over time and how they become biased, and you have to spend some time mitigating bias mitigation practices. One personal, and I do mean personal, one personal habit I have is I personally take every promotion test. Other than driver other than driver, I don't take the driver test. And I crapped out on the hazmat test, but lieutenant, captain, battalion, deputy, I physically take the test. Okay. I want to be able to say, this is a good test. And if I have to adjudicate any grievances with it, I want to be able to say, I know the test, I know the structure and the process in which we got to this final product. I took the test. You have a good test, or not. And I send the test committee back, to the drawing board and redo it. But you've got to have some skin in the game. This is not something we're going to just pull out of a manual, off a wall. It's collaborative and it's participatory.
Well, John, I'll tell you,
yeah.
if there's any take home from this entire discussion, if people didn't take note of your last comment, that as the fire chief, you take every promotional exam just so you can feel it, to make sure it fits into your philosophy, your leadership style. That's a great plus there. Now, John, I'm going to warn you, after we're done with Reggie, you're getting the next question first. So,
great.
So go ahead, Reggie. I wanted you to share some of the things you did to reach out within the community, so some of those inequities were balanced out a little bit, where people were given opportunity. Go ahead.
Sure. I first want to start off by saying I'm with John. I would not take my driver's test. Pump calculations.
No.
I'm all set. I'm all set with the pump calculations. For us at Harvard, I'm gonna try to be very detailed, but as brief as possible. Again, we have a very diverse city here in Hartford, but we're a city that struggles financially. So out of our 124,000 residents, we have 46,000 households here in Hartford. Out of the 46,000 households, 26,000 are families. Out of the 26,000 families and the 46,000 total households, 14.6% of our residents are on public assistance. And that's an important number to know and understand, because social economics are drivers for everything in our society, especially as it pertains to local government. Our unemployment in one of our neighborhoods is 30.6%. The persons living below the poverty level in our worst neighborhood, that is 15.9%. Those are real numbers. And so I said all that just to highlight the fact that for our entry-level process, our citizens, for the most part, because the average medium household income in Hartford is $31,000 a year, they can't afford to pay the $150 fee for the CPAT exam. So what we have decided to do here in Hartford is to have a HPAT, so where we utilize the same CPAT equipment, but we put the physical ability test on ourselves. We do not charge a fee. It's a $20 application fee for the entire Hartford firefighter process, but they do not have to pay that $150, because we know and understand that some of our citizens would have to make a decision to either pay their light bill or apply for the greatest job in the world. I don't want to be the reason why they do that. So that's number one of the things that we change. Number two, the written examination. We changed the weights in the written examination. Obviously, the school system outside of the city of Hartford typically is much better than what you would find within our 17 square miles. So recognizing the fact that persons of color do better with behavioral questions in comparison to mechanical aptitude, me as the chief, and I'm pretty sure a lot of my fellow fire chiefs would agree, that we care about hiring good men and women. Because if we hire a good man or woman, we can make them into a great firefighter. So why would I be concerned about their ability to decipher between gear 1 is going this way, gear 2 is going this way, which direction is gear 3 going? I could care less about that. I want to make sure that you understand ethics, that you understand integrity, you understand morality, and you understand getting the job done. That's what I care about as a fire chief. So what we did, we changed the weights. Instead of it being heavy weight on mechanical aptitude, we put heavy weight on the behavioral questions, which industry best standards show that there are great results in having qualified, diverse candidates finish very well in your hiring process if you were to do that. And then last but not least, we have a cadet program to where from 18 to 24, a Hartford resident, you can be a Hartford cadet, and you are a part-time employee for the city. You work hand in hand with our public fire life safety educators, and at the end of your program, you will have a chance to have a seat in the academy. We have 3 cadets right now that are going through our physical agility test to be in our next recruit class that starts next month. That was in our cadet program for the last several years. That's how we're able to get great qualified men and women who happen to be men and women of color to join the fire department here in Hartford.
And you're doing this within the civil service?
We're doing it within the civil service process, absolutely.
Because one of the questions we had, I was getting ready to go to it, I'm going to go past it, was do you believe the civil service process in place in many cities is helping hurting? And it's not the civil service process, it's what's within that process that needs to be looked at, I think. Any comments on that from Harold or John before I go to our next question regarding civil service testing and stuff? Okay.
No, I Reggie, for all the things that they're doing there in Hartford, we do many of those same things here in Seattle. If you're an applicant, you don't have to take the written, you don't have to pay to take the CPAT or any step along the way. We make sure that there are no barriers there. And one of the things we did a few years ago, we got on board with different testing companies, a different testing company, and now we have, I think last time we had 9 different locations throughout the state of Washington where candidates can actually take the test. And we transitioned to a video written exam. So a portion of it was written and a portion of it was video. So those adjustments that we did, so I applaud the efforts there.
All right, let's go to our next question. I'm just having to be respectful to time. And again, this could be a full day discussion and could be it needs to be a lifetime discussion. I'm a mid-30s white fire officer in a predominantly black-led Metro Fire Department. I genuinely believe the more diverse, the better when hired and promoted fairly. I have been vocal in supporting that, but now I almost feel like the pendulum has swung too far the other way. For example, people aren't getting through CPAT, but still getting hired. I'm almost afraid to do my job as a mid-level fire officer because I don't want to be accused of being racist. Examples: I'm afraid or concerned to tell a minority to shave because it's a known rule, even though it's totally ignored. If I tell somebody to shave but no one else is enforcing the rule, I become targeted. I have a black firefighter who is very slow to respond to the rig when we have a run. But then I'm a white fire officer picking on this black kid. I understand this is what people of color and women have endured for a long time, but I genuinely need some guidance. How can I move forward? I genuinely want to do the right thing, but it's very challenging for me at times. There's your question. John, let's start with you.
Well, I'll tell this person that none of us on this call, or many that I know, nobody wants a freebie. Nobody wants to be treated or given a free pass. We don't. Okay, we want equity and fairness. All right. If shaving is the policy, is the rule, then shaving is the accountability piece. I talked about the wall and the core values of the wall. If we're not living them all, then we're not living any of them. Okay, and it's fair and equitable. We don't want to be treated special. It's a meritocracy. We want the same access and be included and have fairness and transparency and these same words, regardless of race, creed, and color. The issues come in when access and equity isn't there. All right. Now, if some of those things that was just spoken of, those examples exist, you have a bigger problem. You have a leadership issue. You have a cultural issue. This is not a black thing, shave, smoke to the rig. The issue is huge. If the rig's getting out delayed because of anyone being slow, it's a big deal. It's a integrity. It's a credibility. You're cheating your community, and I could go on and on with it. I don't want to muddle the water of equity and inclusion with a free pass. That's not two different things we're talking about here. It's all about the leadership, and it doesn't sound like if this officer is thinking this way, I got to check him or her. We got a conversation to have because they're not leading.
Very good. Harold, comments?
No, I agree with John. I mean, it starts off with providing clarity of expectations, and generally our policies and guidelines do that for us. And so we all have to lead from where we are. So that officer, I would ask them to lead from where you are. Do the best you can and seek out for assistance where you can. The officer's trying to look at the entire organization and almost giving themselves a way out. That's not who we are as leaders. That's not who we are as firefighters. So the equity issue is much bigger than being late to the rig or shaving. Providing clarity of expectations, understanding our policies in the organization, and really working hard to make sure we have an equitable environment for all who serve the community.
Reggie?
So, officer, all I got to tell you is this: keep doing the right thing. When you exercise leadership, people are going to come for you. And that is part of the privilege of leading, because you have persons in position of authority, you have men and women who exercise leadership, and you have folks who have to manage on occasion. So as a company officer, you have legitimate authority from the office of the chief, but you're actually on the piece in the house with the men and women who gets the job done. You are the most important person in the firehouse. You should not be worried about titles or labels that people may give you because you're doing the right thing. And I know you may say, well, Reggie, that's easy for you to say because you haven't lived it. Brother, trust me, I live it every single day. You say you're a white officer by a black-led department and you're catching shots. I am a black chief and I catch shots from everyone. Black, white, Latino, female, male, it doesn't matter because you exercise leadership. And if you do it with morality, you do it with ethics, you do the right thing, you have nothing to worry about. Trust me. It's something that you're going to be able to manage a lot better as you go further on in your career, but don't shy away from doing the right thing because you're worried about what someone may say. Take all your arrows to the chest. Don't take not one arrow to your back.
And phenomenal response. And as I sort of use this frame that I often use, I remind people, stay in your lane. What's the most you can do with the area of responsibility you have? You may not be able to fix that, but let's make sure your square, your crew, your shift is as good as they can be, regardless of the issue.
It goes to the circle of control and then your sphere of influence. And to Billy's point, focus on your circle of control with your company. Your sphere of influence, all those things that's happening around you on other shifts with different battalions, that's just within your influence. But within your control, make sure everything within your control is jam up.
Okay. We're watching the time. I'm going to do one more question, then we're going to move to a discussion of strategies that work. And audience members, stick with us because we're going to do an audience poll in just a minute. So what programs, and I think we've covered quite a bit of this, but I want to give our three chiefs the opportunity. What programs can departments develop to provide education to our members about what white privilege and race inequity are and how they can be addressed with our interactions in the communities? Now, I heard a whole lot of eye roll put up the white privilege issue because I don't think it's understood. It's like a dark room, and when we're in a dark room, we don't know what we have, so therefore we fear it. So can you explain at a firefighter level how we explain to them what white privilege is? And again, I think you covered some of this, race inequity, and how we can address them in our interactions, not only in the firehouse, but within our communities. So anything to add to that? Harold, we'll start with you and go down the line.
Sure. You know, first, we all have to recognize that we all carry implicit biases, and then that's built in who we are. So me growing up as a black man in this country, I carry certain things with me. A white man growing up in this country will carry certain things with them. So understanding that there are clearly differences in our organization or in our community or in our country is a really, really good place to start. You know, one of the things we can do as organizational leaders is bring in credible messengers to help with the awareness and understanding. You know, we're working hard to create cultural competence and understanding who we are as individuals, because that's really who it starts from. It starts from us, from within inside us, in order for us to communicate that outside of us. But bringing in leaders and trainers who can really have credibility with the organization and develop programs to help educate the organization, that's going to be really important for us. Here in the city of Seattle, we have the Race and Social Justice Initiative that's been moving for at least a decade now. And, you know, it had different iterations and fits and starts along the way, but working with our core team, our Race and Social Justice team, to build out our programs that we're delivering to the organization is very important for us, for everybody to understand the different privileges and that we carry and the different biases that we have. And what that's going to do for us as an organization is going to create cultural competence, which should help us serve the community better.
John?
You know, we have to invest a lot in professional development at all ranks, all levels. Treat it like our technical know-how, our EMT credentialing and other things. This is a continuing education. Con Ed goes a long way. And I hate to be a broken record, but going back to that listening tool, listening ability. If you're the dominant culture, if you're the white person or the white male, whatever we're defined as the dominant culture, you wouldn't know what white privilege is most often unless someone else was telling you or explaining to you or trying to explain to you what it is. So the ability to listen, both the dominant culture and the underrepresented culture, what we see and what you see, or we can see the same thing on the street and have different perspectives on it. And that the only way we can move past some of that is by trying to understand each other. You know, I spent a long time in the Marines and then obviously here in the fire service. And I'm sure all of us on this call at one point or another met a person who this was their first time serving with someone that looks like me. Be it in my squad, in my platoon, in the fire service or whatever, there were times where, you know, you're the first Black man I've ever worked with because I came from a part of the country where you just weren't there, you know. So, and oftentimes, I think all the times, those ended up being some really good relationships. Some of those are still friends 30, 40, 50, 40 years later, you know, because we learned from each other. And until today, I still talk to people who had never seen a person that looked like me until we were in the fighting hole together, you know. So it's a great opportunity to learn just by having ears to hear and listen.
The listening, again, ties right into the discussion. Reggie?
You know, obviously Harold and John did an outstanding job explaining, you know, some tips and some things that could be done to have these courageous conversations in the firehouse. And it just reminded me of what we did here in Hartford going back roughly 5 years ago as we developed our professional development program, the administration along with labor leadership with representation from all ranks of the department. And, you know, one of the topics that we had, or several of the topics that we had within all ranks within the organization that was included in that PDP was things that we refer to as soft skills, but there's, you know, nothing really soft about it. It's very hard discussions as you talk about leadership, as you talk about people, as you talk about behavior. And so that leads me into, for us in Hartford, we've always had in our frontline apparatus 5 bucket trucks, mid-mount Sutphens. We've had it for decades. That's what we currently have now. I wanted a diversity of trucks for our operations for obvious reasons. I think any fire chief would want diverse opportunities as it pertains to fireground operations. So we looked at establishing our truck committee. Our truck committee, they spec'd out a rear mount straight stick. Boston Fire right next door, they have a ton of the E1 rear mount straight sticks. And what I've done is hired a retired Lieutenant Jim O'Brien, who knows those trucks inside out. He ran their shop for years prior to him retiring, for the simple fact of he's familiar with the apparatus. If there's any anticipated problems that we're going to have, he could share that with the membership. And then naturally, the team could get familiar with the piece, feel comfortable with it before we put it in service. So that same dialogue discussion is going to follow that same process as it pertains to equity, diversity, and inclusion in the fire service. We have the talent within our own organization to have these discussions in a respectful manner. And so once we empower our membership to be able to say what they mean what they say, we can grow together, we can heal together, we're going to be a much better organization because of it. So although there are subject matter experts outside of each one of our organizations, let's not forget about the men and women who's already there wearing a uniform that could really drive these conversations in our firehouses.
Big deal. When the talent exists in your fire department, you're foolish to not utilize that talent. Absolutely. In a variety of issues, whatever they may be. In Harold's committee that he utilizes, or any of you. And I mean, John taking the test, I mean, the whole thing is a much better view. And this is what I want to ask our audience, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to each of the chiefs and ask them to give us the one thing that they want to give you before we sign off in just a few minutes. So while we're doing that, audience members, I'll ask you we're going to do an audience poll. And here's the question. It's simple yes, no, or not sure. Did you learn at least one thing you can try to do differently as a result of this presentation? This is a social experiment we're doing. I just want to see if we've been successful in at least taking it one step further, using the word better. Did you learn at least one thing you can try as a firefighter, fire officer, as a chief, that you can try or perhaps consider doing differently as a result of today's presentation? Okay, please take the poll. And let's get back to our discussion as you're taking the poll. And Chiefs, we'll start with you, Reggie. Please give our audience, your brothers and sister firefighters who joined us today, what you want them to take away from today's discussion.
Billy, what I would want everyone to take away from this discussion is we have more alike and in common than we have different. I know for me, I've been, again, in the fire service for 20 years. I am just as in love and just as passionate about our beloved profession today as I was 20 years ago. And being on the receiving end of racism, discrimination, and bigotry, for me, I find it my duty, and this is something I'm very passionate about, I find it my duty to ensure there is an equitable and safe workplace for everyone that's a member of the organization. It does not matter their gender, does not matter their religious preference, their sexual orientation. None of that matters. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the badge on our chest and the patch on our shoulder and our oath of office. If we can focus on the things that bring us together and the love and the passion that we share, we're only going to be better, not only as individuals, but we're going to be better as respective organizations, and we're going to be better as an overall profession. I appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate you being here today, Reggie. John?
So, I'll from the firefighter's perspective, I would say demand. I'll use the word demand, collaborative leadership from your leaders. Demand an access, a way to get information and be included, and we have a Fire Chiefs Equity and Inclusion Council. I have a council, and we touched on it. I think Harold has something similar as well, and Reggie might as well. But the ability to provide input on peer support, on behavioral health, on health in general, physical and mental health, and perspectives on equity and inclusion. I made a statement a few minutes ago when I said I didn't come with a manual. All right, I need to know how is this playing out on the street? What's the ground truth? Demand servant leadership from us. Yes, we got to these positions. It's an honor. It's a privilege. It's also a responsibility. It's a responsibility to understand how our decisions, from policies to testing to promotions to manuals, how does it play on the street? And we have to engage with the troops, and break down the us versus y'all. We don't have all the answers. This is a team sport, so we have to keep emphasizing that.
Thank you, John, and thanks for joining us today and providing your insight. Harold?
First I want to thank my peers for being on this call with me today, and thank you to all those who took the time to listen in. I think it's a really important conversation for us to have. It's a really hard question to say just do one thing. So I'm probably not going to say just one thing. I know just looking at my peers in King County and our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, we took a pretty bold step and hired a consultant to do a research report for us on this topic here in King County, and you're going to have a copy of that. And there's a lot of different tools and things that document will provide. That's one thing you can do, is because we have to lead from the front. This has to come from the fire chief's office for it to be important, just like anything else. Inside of your organization, you're going to have to assemble a group of people who are going to give you unfiltered feedback. They're only going to do that if you allow them to do that, but this group will be looking at these issues through a different lens. You have to take the time to look at your policies, practice, procedures with a different lens. You as the chief, you may not see it. I as the chief may not see it. I'm so far removed from the boots on the ground firefighter that I will not have the same view. But you can assemble a team who really want to help you and help your organization. So if I was going to recommend doing one thing, I would say assemble a team that's going to help you get eyes on the issues you're not seeing, so you can start to put plans together with your organization on how to become better.
And assemble that team with a fair means of bringing people in. Just don't pick your buddies and pals who are going to be your yes people and give you the answers you want to hear. And that's at the chief level, and that's a bold step as well. Be willing to have that honest input and feedback. Big deal. Well, listen, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon from Lexipol to wrap this up.
Thank you, Chief Goldfeder, and to all the chiefs on our panel. Wow, that was really great discussion. So many things that we covered, so many things that we could still cover. I just really thank you for your time, your honesty, your openness with our audience. And also thank the audience. You know, we got so many great questions and comments coming in. We'll be sure to pass those along to our panelists as well. And as Chief Scoggins referenced, you know, there are definitely a lot of resources available to you that that we'll be sharing later today. Please do delve into those. I think that it's very generous of Chief Scoggins to share the white paper and the toolkit with us. But there's also a lot of other things on that website as well. I want to just sum up by saying this. You know, we were really quite amazed by the response to this webinar, and obviously pleased. And so when you do go back out today, I want you to know that you're not going out there alone. I know a lot of the time these are difficult conversations, these are difficult steps to take. But the response to this webinar, the thousands of people who registered to hear and to listen and to learn, show us that you're not alone. So we're not going to always make the right decisions. We'll make mistakes, but if we can all be in that frame of mind of listening and learning and being open-minded, I think we can make a difference. And if you know that even if you feel alone in your department, just think back to this day where a lot of people joined you and learned about these issues and went out with that passion to do something a little different. So thanks for being here. Huge thanks to our panel. And please do stay safe, and we will see you again at another Lexipol event, hopefully very soon. Take care.